Hey there, podcast and YouTube family. Sean Tabbitt here. Today, I have a great interview for you with my friend John Burke. We discuss his brand new book, Imagine the God of Heaven, that's going to be releasing in November. But before we get to that, I'm going to share a book trailer that we created for Randy K's and my new book, Near Death Experiences 101 Short Stories that will help you understand heaven, hell, and the afterlife. If you want to find out more about that book, head on over to realndestories.com. Enjoy. We all have an appointment with death one day. But what happens when we cross over to the other side? Find out that and more in a brand new book by Randy K and Sean Tabbitt called Near Death Experiences, 101 Short Stories that will help you understand heaven, hell, and the afterlife. Available wherever great books are sold. It's time for another episode of the Sean Tabbitt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, digging into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my special guest is my friend John Burke, and we're going to be discussing his brand new book, Imagine the God of Heaven, Near-Death Experiences, God's Revelation, and the Love You've Always Wanted. John, it is always a pleasure to see you, my friend. Welcome back to the show.
Great to see you, Sean. Thanks for having me back on.
Well, truly my pleasure. I kind of chuckle because when I interviewed you years ago about Imagine Heaven, NDEs were not a normal part of my daily or weekly conversation. And even that, it felt a little bit out of the box because I had a discomfort bit in just that space because it was so new to me. So it's funny these years later, like this is such a norm. You and I finally met in person at a filming the other year. And so I feel like we're much more kindred spirits than our.
Now we're both in the weird box together.
That's right. You know, us people in the weird box, we got to stick together. I think the place I'd love to start, and I think this is probably where we went last time, but I feel like it's important in terms of for you, and this is how the book starts out. What was your first exposure into the NDE world? Because right now, the amount of books coming out, things we're seeing in film and TV, these conversations, much more of a regular part of society and discussion. But back in the day, a little harder to find.
Yeah, my whole journey with this topic was not intentional. It started, decades ago when my father was dying of cancer. This is the late 70s, early 80s. And someone gave him the very first research, Moody's book, on near-death experiences. And I picked it up. And I was an agnostic. I didn't believe in God. Jesus was a myth, and I read it in one night and said, oh my gosh, this could be actual evidence that, and I studied engineering. I worked as an engineer. So I have a very analytical, skeptical mind. That's why I jokingly said the weird box. I don't really mean to label like that. But sometimes, just like you felt, I was like, it took me 35 years to write Imagine Heaven for a reason, because I was like, I don't know, how do all these pieces fit? And, I had a curiosity that did take me from engineering into ministry. I came to faith in Christ really for other reasons than near-death experiences, which I also put in Imagine the God of Heaven. Because what I'm trying to do in Imagine the God of Heaven is show that these near-death experiences are happening all over the world. And the God they experience has not just shown up all of a sudden in the last 40 years when we are hearing of near-death experiences. I'm showing this is the same God who's been revealing himself through history to the Jewish prophets and through Jesus. And now he's just showing the reality of what he said in Genesis chapter 12. When he created the Jewish nation, he said, I'm going to bless you and you will be a blessing to all the nations. And so I think all these NDEs that are happening more and more are God's increasing testimony to all the nations that, hey, I'm the God who is for you, not against you. I did what I did through Jesus to offer everyone a way back, to be my children. So I studied these for about 35 years. I've studied thousands now. I've interviewed hundreds personally. And then finally wrote Imagine Heaven in 2015, and then quickly said, Lord, I think I'm done writing. I did what you wanted there. because I was busy pastoring a church that we started 25 years ago. And I said, you called me to that. I'm going to do that. Be faithful, unless you tell me to write. And so now, again, and I think there's a reason for it too. I think this is God's new apologetic to a globally connected world. I really do. And what I feel he's calling me to do is connect the scriptures to the commonalities of these experiences to help people see the whole reality of God, not just from individual NDEs perspective, but how they actually are adding color to what the scriptures have told us all along. And in some cases where they're deviating and why that is. And I think that's equally as important.
Well, I think for all of us who dabble in this space, but we're non-experiencers, if we all go to an event, I've had a T-shirt made that says "All my friends went to heaven, and all I've gotten is this lousy T-shirt." And so
That's great.
that way we'd all stand out, so they'd know, oh, these are the people who write about it but haven't been there.
I know. I've started jokingly saying when people ask me what they do, well, I talk to dead people.
Some of the nicest people I've met are dead people,
Yes.
for sure. But I think to some degree, the cultural interest, I mean, you've got all these shows about the paranormal and ghost hunting. And so there's a lot of hunger in culture for spiritual themes and content. A lot of it, I think, related to people are largely unchurched in a lot of places, and they have this
It's such an open
desire
door.
to connect. And so that's the thing I do love about kind of the explosion we've seen of really quality books in the near-death experience space, some really great films and kind of miniseries and things where it's scratching that itch that, people are going to fill it with something. So I'd rather have them fill it with good content that's going to connect them with the God of the Bible. It's been really interesting. I've been trying the past couple years to find people who have near-death experiences that kind of deviate some from kind of the traditional vibe of what we've seen with a lot of experiences. But we both interviewed Father Cedric Pesenia, and like I had hoped there would be something particularly Catholic about his experience, but it wasn't. It kind of fit with a lot of other experiences, and so yeah, that's something I hope there's more I can research on that. But just that consistency across cultures and different people groups, these experiences are largely the same.
Well, and that's in chapter 2 of Imagine the God of Heaven. I point out 10 points of evidence that any alternate explanation has to take into account. Because I don't know if you saw it, but everybody's been sending me the CNN article and others where it says near-death experiences are now explained as a blip in the brain, study says. Okay. Well, that's not even what their article says, because that's just clickbait, it turns out. But there are a lot of these alternate theories of explanation. And I go into 10 points of evidence, but just 4 of them real quick are veridical observations. When people are out of their bodies, they observe their resuscitation and make all these observations. And it's been scientifically studied, showing that NDEs have a 92% of their observations are 100% accurate. Another 6% have some idiosyncrasies to them. Only 2% were inaccurate. And so that can't be explained by a blip in the brain, because they're observing things when their brain is having no blips and they have no hearing, they have no eyesight. Second, blind people, when they have a near-death experience, see the same thing. They experience the same thing. And they experience things they would have never had in their brain. Like they say the light of heaven comes out of everything. Well, Isaiah 60 tells us in Revelation 21 that there is no sun or moon in heaven. The glory of God gives it light. But where would a blind person have ever heard that light comes out of everything? They would have never heard that on earth. Third is that people meet people on the other side that they didn't even know or didn't know were dead, like children meeting their siblings who were miscarried that they didn't even know they had a sibling. And then their mom and dad, when they come back, going, yep, we never told you about that. You do have a brother or sister. And then fourth, and this is 4 out of 10, there are others. Why? And this is the point of Imagine the God of Heaven, or the first section is God of all the nations. Why are people, and I have Santosh Akarchi, who is a Hindu manufacturing engineer, an imam from Rwanda, a Muslim imam, uh, a woman from Tehran, also Muslim, related to the Prophet Muhammad. Yet who they encounter when they die is the same God. In Bibi's case in Tehran, he said to her, "I am he who is." And she comes back and starts to explore and finds out, oh, that's the God of Yahweh. That's what he said to Moses. That was her. That's what the way she said it through English from Farsi to me. So I got the idea. It's I am he who is, and then you have this Rwandan imam who, you remember Ivan Tuttle's mom praying for him and God saying he's prayed for him 20,000 times. Well, here's this Rwandan mom who is a witch. She worships the goddess Bako. His father is a sheikh. He's a Muslim imam. When he dies of blood cancer, Swadik is rescued by Jesus because his mom went to the Christians and said, none of our magic and none of our Quran or anything has done anything. Maybe your God can help. Will you pray? And let's pray to Jesus. And they prayed to Jesus and rescues Swadik. He's now an Anglican priest in Rwanda, and he's had a threat on his life like 7 times already. So you see these, God is doing something all over the world, and it's consistent. And I'm showing in Imagine the God of Heaven, it's consistent with who he's been revealing himself to be all throughout history. And that's another point of evidence that how do you explain that? It's not a blip in the brain, for sure.
Yeah, that blip in the brain argument, or if it's just, the clickbait headline, so many of the people you and I have met through the years, they were clinically dead. Some of them for, 10, 20, 30 minutes, some of them gone for hours, and then all of a sudden they come back. So that blip in the brain is a pretty hard pill to swallow, just based on all the stories I know you and I have both encountered. Just a comment, one of my favorite sort of guests is the person who, whether they're here in the States or elsewhere, they just weren't a Christian at all, had no experience or exposure to the Bible. And then all of a sudden, after their experience, they're changed, and they start digging into the scriptures, and they find things in the Bible that they encountered in heaven, but they had absolutely no idea that what they saw in their afterlife experience was part of the Bible or was something that comes out of scripture. I think those are my favorite stories, because there's nothing in their background or experience that would kind of cause them, even if it's a blip in the brain or a vision or a dream.
Oh, yeah.
They had zero exposure, and yet they find all these profound truths of scripture. And so I don't know if that gets you excited, but that's my favorite kind of story, because they had no way of knowing.
Yeah, like I mean, did you ever interview Santosh Akarchi?
No, I have not.
Oh, he's one of my favorite, but there are many. So he's a manufacturing engineer, has traveled the world, grew up in India. His father was a Sanskrit scholar, so Hinduism was all he knew. He dies when his pancreas or gallstones rupture and blew out his pancreas, and he hears code blue, and he's gone. And he's up above, and he said this brilliant light comes to him. And again, just like people describe, he said it was a divine light. I knew this was the authority of all authorities, and I must obey. He said, but I wanted to. I instantly fell in love with this light because I knew it was for me and protecting me. And this light takes him, and he says, through tunnels and he comes, and he says the light stops over this giant compound. Now, I've been to India many times. We built a hospital there with my church, and there are compounds everywhere in India. There are these high-walled, fenced-in areas. And he described it that way. And at first I was like, what are you talking about? But he said these very high, gorgeous walls. And he said, and when you're there, your eyesight is like telescopic. You can see for thousands of miles. And it said it went thousands of miles. It was in a square shape, and inside these immaculate, gorgeous, beauty of nature, but mansions in these tall buildings of otherworldly building material. And he said, and it had 12 gates. I counted them. And all these gates were closed to me. And I wanted to go in. That was like the desire, the longing of my heart to be in this place. It was so wonderful. And then I looked outside the gate nearest to me and I saw angels guarding it. And I realized I'm looking at the kingdom of heaven. Now, he is describing Revelation 21, the city of God. But he has no background in this at all. And then he looks to his left. He realizes he's up on this high platform and he looks down to his left and he describes what he said was so scary. It was an abyss of darkness that I would fall into if I went there, with a lake of fire. Again, he's Hindu. He's not Christian, right? But he's describing hell. And he's like panicked and steps away. And then he looks to his right. And there he said he saw the Almighty on his throne. And now he's describing who he thinks was Jesus in his glorified state. Later, he thought that. But he was giant. He was like 30 feet tall sitting. And he looks up into his eyes, and his eyes, he said, were like lightning. So he's describing, and white hair. Well, that's how Daniel describes, Daniel chapter 10, he sees the same thing. Eyes like lightning, face like the sun, and a robe with a gold sash. I think pre-incarnate Jesus, because then in Revelation 1, John sees the same exactly. Eyes like lightning, face like the sun, and it's Jesus. But Santosh then instantly, as soon as he looks in his eyes, he has a life review and sees all of his sins and realizes, I deserve that. I deserve that abyss. And he falls to his knees and just says, I'm so sorry, Lord, forgive me, Lord, forgive me. And then the Lord speaks to him. And he said, it shocked me because his voice was so full of tenderness and mercy and compassion and love. And he said, I'm going to send you back. And when I send you back, I want you to love your family, and especially your daughter. She needs you right now. Which is fascinating because it shows us that God is the God of all people, and he cares about all people. He cares about Santosh's daughter. Santosh didn't know him and wasn't seeking him, but he still cares, right? And then Santosh notices on the right side of the throne what he called a narrow gate or narrow door that was open to him. And he said, Lord, when I come back, because he felt the love from the Lord, he said, when I come back, I want to go through that narrow door. I want to go through that narrow gate. How do I go through it? And the Lord said to him, I want to see how honest you are with me. I want honest relationship. And Santosh was thinking about what temple or mosque or church or what do I go to? I'll go to whatever you want. He said, not one day a week. I want you 365, 24/7, walk with me. And then he said, the wages of sin is death. Surrender your life to me daily. And then he sends him back. And then 2 years, now that's all scripture. Santosh had no idea. And he wrote all that before he had any idea. He wrote it all down. And 2 years, and he comes back seeking. And that's an important thing is NDEs come back and it's just like the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul saw the same brilliant God of light, Acts chapter 9, but he was persecuting Christians and Jesus, right? And he asked Jesus, Lord, who are you? And he says, I'm Jesus whom you're persecuting. But notice Jesus did not tell him what to do. He didn't explain the gospel. He didn't say, believe in me, follow me. He sent Ananias to tell him that. And Paul still had to decide. He still had a free will. Will I, basically be baptized for the remission of my sin and follow Jesus? And these NDEs, it's the same thing. Just because they see God, that doesn't, or have a vision of hell, that doesn't mean their eternal destiny is set. These are testimonies, I think, to all of us. And so Santosh comes back and he's seeking God with all his heart. He's like, this was not one of the Hindu gods. Who was this God of compassion? I know I deserve that, but he gave me grace. Why? 2 years later, his daughter is invited to sing in a choir at a church. She was a choral major in college. And he goes, and when Santosh walks in to hear his daughter, he feels the presence of that same Almighty God. And the message is on the narrow gate and how Jesus is the gate through which the sheep must enter. And he's blown away. And he goes back and starts reading the Bible and he says, this is everything I experienced. And he's a very sweet man, dear follower of Christ today.
Wow. That usually these stories have a couple of elements, but that might be one of the top 5 in terms of covering so many things.
Well, and
that can be
I mean,
fascinating.
and the point, like you said, is he's describing things he knew nothing about with exquisite detail. You know, Sweetie, this Rwandan imam, when he died, he was also in a hellish experience at first. And like I said, his mom is praying to Jesus for him. And as we both know, there's something about the prayers of moms and dads for their children that God honors, you know? Into this place comes this man of brilliant light, clothed in a robe, he said, with a crown of thorns, and he holds his hands like this, and in his wrists he sees holes. Now, Sweetie had gotten 3 free movie tickets, and one of the free movies was The Passion of the Christ. And he had no desire to see a movie about Jesus, but he wanted to get the most for his money. So he had seen that, and he realized who this was. And Jesus said, I died for mankind. You're one for whom I've died. Never deny it and tell everyone. And it's cost him 6 or 7 attempts on his life, because he's in a context where you can't convert from Islam to Christianity, and yet he did, and he is professing. His story is so wild because after Jesus said that, he wakes up and pulls a sheet from over his face and sits up, and he's looking around, and everybody starts screaming, and he's looking around, what's going on? And it's this gathering outside, and he looks down and there's a hole in the ground. He's like, someone must have died. This must be someone's funeral. And then he sees Jesus over there, and all of a sudden he remembers what he said, and he said, Jesus is here. Jesus rescued me. He's the one who did it. And everybody freaks out. But about half of them came to faith in Jesus that day. And as I said, he now, continues. He's like going everywhere, telling them about what happened and who Jesus is and what he's done for them.
Wow, both fascinating encounters there. I want to take just a brief left turn for a moment. You and I were getting into before we started the interview just how these sorts of hearing so many of these encounters and stories have impacted how we relate to other people. I mean, I'd love to hear, through the years as you've gotten deeper and deeper in the NDE space, how has this impacted you kind of ministry wise? I mean, I can say just based on my experiences the past couple of years, there are so many people that reach out to me or reach out to Randy Kay and others about they have questions about God, or my son committed suicide, or my father just died and I'm worried that he's not in heaven. Like, once you get immersed in this space, people put you on a pedestal sort of as an expert in these sorts of matters. Maybe from when you started penning Imagine Heaven to now, how has the sorts of things people come at you for ministry wise, how has that shifted? I imagine you of all people get a lot of unique requests or questions in this space.
Yeah. And I've thought about this, Sean, because um, I think these stories, I call them, they're testimonies. They really are testimonies. And they shaped a lot of how I've read and studied the Bible, because remember that it was parallel for me all the way back, 35, 40 years ago. But I will say that even with that, since writing Imagine Heaven, there are even more that just blow my mind. And it hasn't changed my theology. It's helped me understand I think to a greater degree, some things that I'll tell you in the past, probably, probably I would have said, well, that's metaphorical. That's just metaphor. But I've started to realize that no, in the life to come, that might be more real than I realized. And I mean, I'll give you one example that I was thinking about the other day, because Psalm 37:4 has been a memory verse of mine for a long, long time. It says, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. And I've always said, I've always taught on that that doesn't mean if you desire a Lamborghini, he's going to give you a Lamborghini. It's not a thing like that. It's that if you delight yourself in God, you're following God, you want what he wants, you can trust your desires more and more, and you can follow them because they're in line with God's desires. I think there's probably still a point that's true to that. However, like hearing, like, for instance, Jim Woodford, who I interviewed him for 4 hours and we still weren't done. It's like, but here's a guy who, he was an agnostic when he died, last second cried out to God to forgive him. And I find interesting that when people are last minute, or they get to see heaven and they see God, but they didn't know him, he also gives them a glimpse of hell. He shows them the reality of both. And Jim got that. And then he's walking with these angels through heaven. And the angel says, touch my robe. And he does. And suddenly they're up and they're like flying above what he sees as the holy city of God, what Santosh described exactly. And he's describing it. And he thought to himself, wow, this is kind of like an aerial holding pattern, like any big city, because he was a commercial airline pilot. So he's a commercial airline pilot who loved horses, very wealthy man. He had a horse farm and 19 British sports cars, but had denied God until the last second. But he realizes in this holding pattern, flying over the holy city, God must be giving me this because I'm an airline pilot. Well, interestingly, Captain Dale Black, God gave him the same thing. He's also an airline pilot. He gave him the same aerial coming into the holy city view. Then Jim comes back down on the ground and they come to the split rail fence, and the angel says to him, Jim, look. And out from this grove of trees trot these 3 gorgeous Arabian horses, white, and the grass lighting up underneath them. And Jim realizes that God is showing him the things that he would desire most. And Randy is another one. Randy, Jesus was walking with Jesus, and he had a little dog, Casey, who would jump up and lick his face like a lollipop. And Casey was his best friend. He had a rough childhood and was bullied a lot and in the hospital a lot. So Casey was his everything. And then Casey died, and he's there with Jesus, and Jesus shows him his joy, right? He shows him these children playing. I love this because he said it was like this mountain hillside, and it was like a waterfall, but it was a waterfall of linens that were coming down and sweeping out onto this plain. And it was like all these children are jumping and bouncing with angels. And it's like God's bounce house, And Jesus, and he said, what is that? And Jesus said, those are the children whose lives were cut short, either miscarried or abortion or just died young in childhood. I'm restoring their joy. And then Randy realized he was also restoring his joy that had been cut short in childhood. And then Jesus says, look, and he does like this, and Randy looks, and here comes in heaven Casey, his dog, who jumps up and starts licking his face like a lollipop, and then jumps down and runs away. And Jesus said, see, beloved, I give you the desires of your heart. And I think, that's just one example that, and it's why I was so excited about writing Imagine the God of Heaven, because we all put God in a box, right? Some of us don't realize how mysterious. He's infinite and eternal. All these attributes we talk about, and how sovereign, how, powerful. And we need to stretch our imagination there. But others don't realize that same infinite, eternal, powerful God is so relatable and even fun and even humorous. And for some, that's like, no, that's not God. Well, you need to stretch your box because he doesn't fit in your box. And that's what I love. And that's what this has done, is it's shown me that God, one of the things I love is that, yes, God is the all-powerful, eternal, omniscient, omnipresent, all those words, but hearing those people describe what those words are experienced like, that stretched my imagination. And I was just in awe, just in awe of God and in love with God. You start to realize, and that's why I subtitled it, you start to realize he is the love I've always wanted. Every other relationship is just a metaphor for this relationship. But also in this relationship. And Sean, that's what so many I interviewed said to me. He said, because I would ask them about the beauties of heaven and the wonders and they would say, yeah, all that was there and it was amazing, but nothing compared to being in his presence.
Yeah.
That's all I wanted.
Just the ultimate, like, you've arrived where you've always belonged, and just the kind of the love that permeates all of your being and everything.
And our word love, it doesn't really cut it. I interviewed this one guy, Dr. Ron Smotherman, who his is a wild story. He's a neurologist and a psychiatrist. He let this guy stay in his house while he was traveling. When he comes back, the guy had a psychotic break and starts to beat him up and stab him with a knife 13 times. And right before he's going for the heart on the 14th, and he showed me he has a knife wound through his neck that he says doctors don't understand why I'm alive. Like, it came out the backside, should not have. And he said time froze. And this guy is frozen with a knife when suddenly down this hallway of light comes this beam of light that he said was just exploding. He said, imagine being 5 feet away from the pinpoint of a nuclear explosion. He said that was what the light was like, but it wasn't just light. It was roiling like a nuclear explosion with love. And he said, and he said that these 9 qualities or characteristics of God just imprinted themselves immediately on my soul. But one of them was infinite love. And he later said, our word love just doesn't do it justice. He said, our word love, like, imagine you're standing in the ocean and there are waves gently coming up and hitting your knees, right? And that's human love. He said, God's love is, imagine now a tsunami comes and it just blows you away. It's so much more than those little waves. And he said, that's God's love. It blows away fear. It blows away anxiety. It blows away disease. It blows away everything and leaves with it, he said, this joy he felt, that put him into ecstasy. This peace, but the word peace, Dean Braxton said, doesn't cover it. Dean Braxton said, the best way I could say it is I fit. Like acceptance, belonging, And so, yeah, so what I'm excited for people to see and imagine the God of heaven is these things the scriptures have always told us in black and white words. Maybe our imagination doesn't really fully perceive what that is like and what that means to us today, so that we will walk with this God, so that we'll trust this God, so that we'll realize. That was another thing that was new since Imagine Heaven. I know you asked this question, it's endless, but one thing that so many of them said is, when I was there with him, and they would say things that they would pause and they'd say, now I know this wasn't completely true, but I felt like I was his special kid. I felt like
100% comes up all the
I
time.
was the only one he loved. Randy said that. Dean Braxton said that. Suzanne,
Seymour?
huh?
Suzanne Seymour? Seymour, yeah.
Seymour, yeah. She said that. Karina, have you interviewed Karina?
Oh yeah.
Karina, I love what God said to her, right? She's there with the Father. That's the other cool thing. Well, let me I'm going ADD. So Karina, she experiences God in his throne, which, by the way, is not a throne like we think. It's not a chair. It's not a seat. It's a place. Dean Braxton said it's a place, but it's more like out in nature. But she experiences this sea, this blue sea of crystal. She said, "Well, it's a sea of glass." But the last thing she said, "Can I tell others all about this?" And he said, "They're not going to believe you. They're going to think you're crazy." And she said, "I don't care, Father. I'm going to tell everybody. I want to bring thousands back with me. I'll be back with thousands." And he said to her, "You're awesome." And she was like, "You're awesome? God the Father talks like this?" And some Christians will be like, "Okay, that's just wrong." Why is it wrong? I mean, why do we think God is less relatable than a human he created? Why do we think God could be less of a best friend than a fallen best friend? Why do we think God could be less of a spouse? I mean, truly, like, I ask some of these guys when they're in the presence of God, or women in the presence of God, and they're describing it, and they use words like ecstasy. And I'm like, better than any experience on earth? It doesn't even come close to comparing. And so you start to realize he is the relationship we've always wanted. And that's what so to answer your question, yeah, there were so many things, and it's not new. None of it's new, but it adds color to the words of Scripture. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to show people this God of Scripture and God's mystery and majesty and these attributes of God. But what do these people experience that to be? And then what difference does it make for us today walking it out with him?
Wow, that was that ranks up there almost with. I interviewed Wayne Grudem a number of years back about his systematic theology book, and my recurring origin story question. He gave me like a 30-minute response of his personal spiritual formation, which was amazing and was more than half of the interview. But
he was one of my professors in seminary.
Oh, I love that. It's a small world in our space. Just a couple of comments too. I mean, I think of the old kind of Baptist self who went to John Piper's church many years ago. And if I'd tried to start interviewing NDEs back then, it would have really been a challenge for me theologically. I mean, as Randy and I have done so many interviews with people the last few years, the ways that I feel like I've had to stretch, not stepping into unorthodox ideas, but just even the idea that the prayers of a mother or a grandmother would have some kind of significant bearing on somebody's afterlife experience falls in the face, or flies in the face of our very wooden I do this, I go to heaven, I do this, I go to hell, and there's not really any in between. I mean, I feel like that's at least in terms of the comments and messages you get back from some people, they struggle with that sort of a thing. The children and babies in heaven kind of thing, not anything controversial with that, but that consistently comes up with so many different experiencers. And I even think of people like Randy and even Dale Black, where they purposefully have avoided for a long time before they shared their stories, reading about other people's experiences, hearing about other people's experiences, just trying to keep their own experience pure and not taint it with other people's ideas. And yet that babies and children in heaven, I have had at least 4 or 5 guests basically have almost like 75 to 85% identical experiences, which, and these are people who don't know each other. They haven't read each other's stories. And then just last comment, just in terms of things being tailor made to the individual, I've been fascinated by like where they are in life, how they're, what's going on with them. If they need to encounter God as Father, they encounter God as Father, maybe sitting in the Father's lap or something to that extent. Or
that was one that I struggled with.
Yeah.
I was like, what? sitting on God the Father's lap. The first time I heard that, this is kind of how it goes for me. I'm like inside, I'm like, right. My old cynical engineer is like, I don't know about that. But you know, I've learned that if we think we've got God all figured out, then we're leaving no room for infinite, eternal. He's just finite. He's us and in our mind. That's a problem. So I've had to go, okay, I'm going to set that over here. And Lord, you either show me in Scripture or give me others and show me how it aligns with Scripture. And that was one, God the Father. I was like sitting on God's lap. And then about the fourth or fifth time I heard it, and I knew these people and I knew they were sincere. But see, here's the other thing, Sean, that you've probably realized too, is what we have to picture is temporal because it's all we know. So what that means may not be exactly what I'm picturing, but it is, like Dean Braxton said, notice when we talk about these things, we use the word like. We use the word like a lot because, again, you know, I like to say it's another dimension beyond ours. And so, you know, me trying to describe 3 dimensions of color in this room, if I were pressed into a flat black and white painting, how would I describe to people living in the flat black and white painting 3 dimensions of color in 2-dimensional black and white terms in a limited dimension? And that's what they're trying to do. So that's why I think sometimes, and you see it in Scripture. The city of God was gold, but crystal clear. Well, it can't be. I mean, it can't be. But, and I've heard multiple people say this wall of the city was made out of light, but it was love. And then I've heard another say these were stones. This is Dr. Mary Neal. These were stones, but they were made out of love. And I know that's nonsensical, but they were solid, but they were made out of love and light. That is crystalline, but also gold and other. But when you hear it consistently enough and you realize that's exactly what John was struggling with. He's trying to put into words something that it makes sense there because there are other dimensionalities to the experience.
Yeah, I mean, everybody talks about their all their senses are, you know, basically dialed up to 11, and they're experiencing everything at just a depth that they've never ever had before. It seems once we get untethered from our earthbound body, you know, everything that was holding us back is just gone. Even in terms of, like, you know, the communication. Technically, you're not physical, so you're not speaking with a voice box, but it's thought to thought, it's spirit to spirit. It's so other than what we're used to here. In terms of like the lack of language to sufficiently express colors and structures and all the things you see. I think my favorite guest in terms of responding to that, this is Gabe Perot, a young man who had a skateboarding accident. He's maybe a year and a half since his experience. So I feel like as he kind of goes down that road of kind of the 5 to 7 year journey of wrestling with it, his story is going to have more to say. But he described it as, you know, Earth is like the Walmart version of heaven. Like we're kind of lack some of the colors and things. We just can't fully express it. So that's probably one of the best ways that I've heard that described.
Well, you know,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. No, I'm gonna let me fix this in editing, but you go ahead because I want to go to a slightly different direction for here next. So,
well, one of the ones that is the biggest mystery to us that I spend a few chapters on in Imagine the God of Heaven is the Trinity, right? It's like God is revealed throughout the Scriptures as one God, and there's only one, but revealed in Father and Son and Holy Spirit. And that is it's a paradox to us. And yet what I find so fascinating, and I'm showing through the Scriptures how that is, but also hearing again and again, like Heidi, you know, you've interviewed Heidi, right? Yeah. So she was Jewish. The mantra in her family is there is no God. Your life is worthless. Jesus is the biggest hoax ever perpetrated on humankind. And yet she believed in God. She prayed to God every night. And at 16, when her horse crushes her, she's up in the air, and here's Jesus with her. And she knows him. And she knows he's the God. And then in her life review, he shows her that he was sitting by her bed when she prayed at night. He was the one comforting her because she'd been through a lot. To hear her talk about then Jesus taking her hand, and I love this because he takes her hand. She was a 16-year-old who loved bareback horse riding and extreme speed. And he grins at her and they take off. She said, like Superman and Lois Lane holding hands, flying through the universe with a wave of light pushing them along. And she said, I could feel the wave on my feet. So I was barefoot and I would look over at Jesus and he was just grinning ear to ear. And he said, isn't this the coolest thing ever? And she said, it was the most fun I've ever had in my life. And then he takes her to the Father. And she's one of the ones who said, and I am sitting on God's lap and I have my arms around him and he has his arms around me and I never wanted to leave. But she also said he was much bigger than Jesus. He was kind of huge and he was Jesus, but they were separate. And she said, I don't know how God can be a man and God can be love and God can be light, but that's what I experienced. And then when she goes back, he leaves her with his presence, but he leaves Jesus. And she later realized, oh, that's the Holy Spirit. That's the presence I still experience. And so you have a Heidi, a Susan Seymour, who was she, I can't remember, 12 or I think she was 12.
Yeah, she was younger.
Yeah. And, she has this horrible accident on a ski resort that I won't go into, but I go into in the book. And, Jesus is there with her and takes her. And then she experiences the glory of God. Jesus says to her, because he was like this dad, like this really amazing best friend dad. And then he said to her, I'm much more than I'm showing you right now. And then over this mountain range, she sees the sparkle of light, that just this amazing glow that forms what she said looked like a hand that covered the whole sky, but wasn't a hand because it was light that came down and touched Jesus and merged. And then she realized these two lights are one. And when Jesus puts her back in her body, he gives her the symbol of his presence that he puts into her chest, and it's a dove. That's how he represented, I will always be with you. And these are two nurses today who love Jesus and follow Jesus. But in heaven, they say, and Dean Braxton said this, Randy said this too. They say, we get confused about Father, Son, and Spirit, but it's not even a question there. They're one. But I knew when I was talking to one, I was talking to the other two as well. Randy differentiated. He said, I started to realize that when Jesus spoke to me verbally, it was Jesus, but when he was speaking to me in my thoughts, it was the Holy Spirit. And so even in hearing how they describe the Trinity, has helped me as well, I think, in realizing that though it's hard for us to not think of three, there's really only one God. But God has manifested himself, Father, Son, and Spirit. Not millions of gods, Father, Son, and Spirit. And that's what he's revealed through the scriptures, that is his triune nature. But there's some interesting little things that I started to realize, even like, people have said to me, they've probably said to you too, it says in John chapter 1, no one has seen God. So all these NDEs, they're false. They're deceiving you because they say they've seen God. To which I reply, well, so did Isaiah, read Isaiah 6. So did Daniel, read Daniel chapter 10. So did Ezekiel, read Ezekiel 1. So did John the Apostle, read Revelation 1. So that must mean something other than what you're thinking. And so in Imagine the God of Heaven, I go into some of that, you know, it says there's only one God who is over all and through all and in all. And what that's talking about is these theological concepts of immanence and transcendence. So God is immanent. He is in everything. As Paul said in Acts 17, in him we live and move and have our being. And by the way, he was speaking to idol worshipers, right? Not Christians or Jews. And yet still he says that. And so God is immanent. He is everywhere in everything. And you can't see that. You never will be able to. But he revealed himself to the inhabitants of earth through Jesus. But even God on the throne, I believe, is his manifestation to the inhabitants of heaven. But he's still greater than that. Even those who see him there, like Isaiah or the inhabitants of heaven or these NDEs, they still can't see the infinite, eternal God.
Well, John, I love your enthusiasm. I think
You get me going.
every time I've interviewed you or meeting you in person, I think it's just your excitement at retelling these stories every time that really draws people in. For Heidi, again, being on God's lap, like just for where she was in her family life and family experience, experiencing God as Father was absolutely what she needed. I want to touch briefly on her experience with Jesus because it really stands out as unique to me. A lot of people always were like, "What did Jesus look like?" Like so many of our NDE or friends have been asked that question, and a lot of times they're so distracted by being in God's presence and everything they're feeling, they're not even really paying attention to particular features. But what I love about Heidi, and maybe it's just because she was 16, she notes that Jesus had a crooked nose, and I think she talks about that he had like long toes or hair, just funny things that and maybe it's because she was 16, she picked it out. But in terms of like remembering like features of Jesus or those sorts of things. Would love to have you just comment on that because it's just people constantly want to ask about it, and for some of our friends, it's easy to talk about it, and I feel like other people, it's frustrating because that's not what they want to tell you about their time in heaven.
Right. Exactly. And I think that's a good place to start. So there's a professor in Australia that I interviewed, and I kept asking him, so what did Jesus look like? And he got a little frustrated with me. And he said, similar to like Dr. Mary Neal, who Dr. Mary Neal said he looked like bottomless kindness and compassion. And Colin, this professor, said something similar. He said what he looked like was the heart of him. It was his love. That's what I noticed. And that doesn't sound like a physical characteristic, but in heaven it really is. He's so kind. You know, he's so compassionate and so for you. But a lot of people have described physical attributes, and sometimes they're confusing. And so I've had to wrestle with that. I was asked recently, so you write, and I do. I write about some of the confusing parts a little bit in the chapter about Jesus, our brother and mediator, in Imagine the God of Heaven. And I make note that maybe you've noticed along the way that many people say his eyes were blue or a blue green, and others say like a brown with golden kind of, you know, this golden light. And what color were his eyes? And and Dr. Mary Neal told me they were all the colors. So, and then you've got other people who say, well, they were lightning, you know, and when you look in scripture, you see the same thing. You don't see eye color because they don't mention it. But, you know, typically a Jewish person's eye color would be brown. But Heidi noticed they were blue, which I was like, hey, you know, you're Jewish. And in Imagine Heaven, I even wrote like, there was a and I think it is the tribe, was it the tribe of Benjamin that Jesus is from, that were thought to have many of them blue eyes. And so I posited maybe that was the case. You know, why else would all these people be saying that when they should be brown? That would be typical. But on the other hand, when people see Jesus in heaven, you have to understand too that he is the resurrected, glorified Jesus. So he can and does sometimes appear as just like you would think if you met him on the streets of Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. But at other times, he appears like Daniel saw him in Daniel 10, where his face is like the sun and his eyes like lightning and his feet like glowing metal bronze. And that's what John described too in Revelation 1. And white hair. And they describe that. So is his hair brown or is it white? Yes. Are his eyes, Randy said, looking into his eyes, he said, was like looking down deep into the bluest part of the ocean where there are browns and greens and blues and the light's reflecting all these colors and they're just mesmerizing. And that's what I've come to believe is that you look into the eyes of Jesus and you're looking into otherworldly eyes. You're looking into the eyes of God. And that's what they say. You get lost in those eyes. You're transfixed and you're mesmerized, but it's not the color you're mesmerized with, which may be all the colors. I don't know. But it's the heart coming through that he sees into you like no one's ever seen into you. And he knows you like no one's ever known you because he's been with you through everything. That's one of my favorite ones. Randy, I hear more every time I've interviewed Randy, probably 6 times now. Every time it's like
something new comes out every time. Yes.
You didn't tell me that. And he said, well, we never have enough time. I think that's true. Jim Woodford and I talked for 4 hours and he still wasn't done. But when Randy said that Jesus is showing him his life review, right? And he called them vignettes of life, different vignettes. And he was showing him, he had a tough childhood, asthma, a lot in the hospital, a lot, overweight, bullied. Best friend then gets beat up and they move away. And Casey, as his dog, is all he has. And Jesus is showing him all this. And he said, why are you showing me this, Jesus? And then, and then he had this aha that he said was probably the Holy Spirit. Were you there with me through all of those? Were you there in all that suffering? And he looks at Jesus and Jesus has a tear in his eye. And he said, I was there the whole time waiting for you to turn to me. And as you know, Randy, he became agnostic and he didn't turn to Jesus for many years. And so anyway, it's just like you start to see that God may show himself to the inhabitants of earth or the inhabitants of heaven in a certain way. Randy also said, Jesus was always by my side. Yet when I was at the throne of God, here's this gigantic figure, which that was another one that I didn't write about in Imagine Heaven. I heard it a couple times. The gigantic God, the Father that they experienced. And I was like, that's going to blow people. That kind of weirds me out. I don't know. But then I heard it so many times. This time I had to show, no, this is what people experience at the throne of God. He said, but he also saw Jesus there in this blinding fire of this brilliant light with the Father, but he was always by his side. And another time, he was always by his side, but he saw 3 people holding hands praying in heaven, and Jesus was there in their midst praying with them. So again, we try to put him in our box. And this is what I'm hoping Imagine the God of Heaven will do for people. Is we all have a box and God is more than our box. And we've got to expand our imagination to better walk with and trust this God who, he's sovereign. He's powerful. I mean, scary powerful. Dr. Ron Smotherman said, you would be terrified in the presence of that power if it weren't the power of love that you were experiencing, But he's also so relatable. He's so with us. He's so for us. And when you expand your image of God and how you imagine God, to imagine him more and more like he really is, which we'll never fully get there. But the more you do, the more you fall in love with him and trust him.
Well, just to comment back on, interviewing Randy many times, I've between doing interviews in tandem with Randy and interviewing Randy, I've probably heard him tell his story 20, 30 times at this point. But uh, the way what I've seen over the past few years is the way the Holy Spirit kind of falls on an interview and the impact it makes on the audience can vary from time to time in the sense where we might be talking about, yes, something new may come out, but often it's sharing the same story and how it ministers to the people who listen to or watch it, and the response we get is sometimes just really surprising. And so that's one of the things that encourages me about continuing on in this space, and even sometimes helping to write about and retell some of the same stories. Is every time that story hits, God will use it in a way that maybe you can't even expect or see, to impact a new person, to change another life. And so that's part of what keeps driving me and keeps me going. As we kind of move towards wrapping, it's sort of a practical author question. On the one hand, you'd written many books before Imagine Heaven, and when a book comes out, like, you don't know how it's going to hit. And Imagine Heaven has really become one of the de facto books in the NDE space at this point. I would love to hear from your point of view working on the new book. Did you feel an intense pressure, or was there an ease of just working on this new book because I feel like you have a real comfort level operating in the space with all of our friends who've been to heaven?
Well, actually, Sean, I mean, after I wrote Imagine Heaven, I quit writing. I told the Lord, I said, okay, I did what you asked. You didn't call me to be an author. And yes, I'd written, 5 books, I think, but it's hard when you're trying to lead a large multi-site church and, be faithful to that. And God had called me to that. And I said, I think I'm going to stop writing unless you tell me to. And then in COVID, he did. He did very clearly, as clearly as when he told me to leave and plant the church 25 years ago. He told me, I've brought the leadership. You can pass the baton. And I mean, yeah, in like a download, he made it very clear. I want you to take the truths of Scripture that you've been studying for 35 years now and help people see how they tie to what these people are testifying about. And where, because some do, they interpret in their own way that deviates, and why is that? And how to bring those two together. That's really. And so when I started writing, I told the Lord, well, I had 35 years to research the first book. You got to help me out. And he did. And I think that's part of what's going on, is like, he's doing something. This isn't something I just like, hey, I decide I'm going to do this now. Let me go out and do it. I was blown away by how many of these stories from all over the globe started surfacing or coming to me, or coming to you or Randy, and they put the pieces together. And I get so excited about these books, and it almost sounds like, oh, look at me and look what a great book I wrote. I don't think about that at all. I consider myself just a reporter. Like, I'm not a great writer. That's not my, that's not what I set out to do. But I think what I'm doing is I'm taking the truths of the Scriptures and showing through these people how the color of these black and white words, so that we fall in love with God, and so that we trust what he's written in the Scriptures, and we know why. And I got to geek out a little bit in the book about that, because a lot of the prophecies of history that he said, this is how you'll know it's me. I'm putting a sign for the nations. And then he does things that in history, it's mind blowing. And so I'm showing that as well, to show that there's no other God like these NDEers are describing, who's already told us who he is and matches perfectly. So it's kind of like detective work. So I get really excited about it. Yeah, because, not because I've written a great book, but because God is so amazing. That's really it. He's so amazing.
I might argue that God's partnered with you to write a great book, but I love that
Oh, I
idea
would.
of being a reporter or a detective. I think that's a helpful way to think about it, because the reality is it can be hard to tell these stories. And so getting kind of an objective outside third party who kind of knows the structure and the language, I feel like interviewing and having conversations with people, that's often more powerful than the person just trying to tell the story on their own. And so, I feel like
Yeah.
there are so many people's stories that we wouldn't have without people like you and me and Randy's and others taking the time to interview and create a platform and a space for people to share about these encounters. The world will be missing out on what God's trying to do through these testimonies. And so, I'm
Yeah.
just crazy thankful for your work, because I without reading your book Imagine Heaven and Randy's book Dying to Meet Jesus, those were literally the first two NDE related books I ever read. And now all these years later, it's just funny to now be fully immersed in this space myself. You've kind of already answered this question, but I want to go here anyways as we kind of finish up. In terms of reader takeaway, you cover so much. It's a meaty book, but if every reader, like, they get that one thing, there's one truth, call to action, that's something that changes their life. Where you're like, hey, readers, if you get one thing, this is the thing you got to discover in this book.
Oh, that's so hard.
It's a loaded question. Which of your
Well,
children are your favorite?
yes, exactly. And what's the characteristic you like best about them? Yeah, that's really a hard one. But I'll tell you the one that my favorite section of the book is the last section, doing life with the God of joy and laughter. Because I just think people don't enjoy the Lord enough in this life. And when you start to see that, like Heidi, Heidi said to me, she said, I think the reason Jesus took me on that wild speed of light surf trip is he knew me. He knew that would hook me. I was a speed freak. I was, and it was the funnest thing I've ever done in my life. And, I didn't, at first I didn't write about that because I was like, oh, really? That kind of blew my category, that God would have fun. But, then when I have this agnostic doctor and his wife come to my church because their little child who died as an infant at 3 and 4 kept saying to them, I want to go play and run with Jesus in the fields again. And they're like, we've never told you about Jesus. Where'd you hear about Jesus? And he kept saying, I want to go run and play with Jesus in the fields again. And, again and again, another 16-year-old who, when Jesus is taking her back, they are flying and they're dipping and diving and doing the craziest things. And again, at first I'm like, no, that's not God. But here's the thing. Why? I mean, who do we think created us with the ability to enjoy life? Who do we think created the pleasures of life and made it pleasurable for us? Who do we think gives every good gift? It comes from the Father above. And just like I love to give good things to my granddaughters, and I love to see them enjoying them, it gives me enjoyment to enjoy them. And so I go through in that whole last section that this is the God we worship. He put 3 festivals or more yearly for the people of Israel to celebrate with the Lord. And the last thing Jesus said on his last night on earth, John 15, I've told you these things that you might have my joy and that your joy might overflow. And the take home of that last chapter that's been so important is Habakkuk chapter 3, verse 17. Habakkuk, it says, though the cattle are dying in the fields, though the olive crops are rotting and the grapes are rotting on the vines, stock market's falling, and I lost my job and my marriage is falling apart. That's a little parenthetical, but though all that's happening, I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in God, my Savior. You, as a follower of Jesus, your birthright is joy. And what Randy told me is in heaven, he realized as God was restoring, as Jesus was restoring his joy, he said, I realized that. I hadn't realized that until now. It's biblical. But Jesus said to him, every heartache, every suffering, every pain of earth is caused by separation from me. And so, as you know, Randy wanted a blueprint for his life as a CEO. And Jesus said, no, I'm not going to give you a blueprint because you wouldn't depend on me. I want you to walk with me moment by moment. It's the same thing he said to Santosh. Surrender yourself to me daily. Walk with me 365 days. Because as we do that, joy, the joy of the Lord, that's not circumstantial. Things can be going, Jesus said, in this world, you will have sorrow. But take heart, I've overcome the world. And joy, his joy is our birthright. And so that's what I hope people, as they read Imagine the God of Heaven, they'll realize, he is where I find all I long for. I'm going to pursue him wholeheartedly.
Well, and definitely that, just a side comment. Obviously, that love theme comes through in so many of the testimonies that we've all helped share over the years. But in the sense that kind of pleasure in his creation and how exactly God created us to be. Randy and I both interviewed a gentleman named Jojo Morris, and just in his throne room experience, there's this angel recounting different parts of Jojo's life, and God with just rapt attention, and just there's nothing else interesting him except what the angel is sharing as he's recounting different seasons of Jojo's life. God's like, oh yes, that's how he created him. That's exactly how I designed him. It's exactly how it was supposed to be. And of all the stories I've helped share, that's one of my favorites. Just that he was taking such delight in how he created this individual, and that he knew everything about him, and he was just he said the father looked just giddy with excitement that how he had exactly created him is how things were coming out in his life. And I'd never heard it quite like that in the different experiences or stories. I don't know if
Yeah.
you've ever had another story quite like that, but that's one that's always stuck out to me this past year.
Yeah. And I think that's the beauty of this, is that, so we know that if you read the Bible, God rejoices over us. It says, I think in Zephaniah, like a bridegroom rejoicing over his bride. What? But how often do we think that God sees you as the affection of his eye? Like, there's not another relationship on earth that is like his relationship with you. You're unique. And we have a hard time with that because we're like, but there are billions of people. Yeah, God is greater than your limited understanding. It's still true. You are the only one he created to experience. Dean Braxton said this to me. He said, I came to realize that when God created me, he created me for a unique love that no one else can fulfill in relationship to God. And so the scriptures tell us these things, but do we really imagine them to the point where it affects how we see our relationship with God and how we walk with him? And I think that's the beauty of it, is helping people see that this is not new. Yeah, people may take these stories and create some new age philosophy or this or that leaves God out of it, but he's in it. And these are his testimonies. And I think that's why it's so important to tie them back to scripture and show, no, God is doing something here. The evil one has always tried to, take 90% truth and deceive with it. But at the end of the day, I think this is his global apologetic. He's showing, no, I'm the God of all nations. It started in Genesis and it ends with all the nations gathered around my throne. Every tribe, every tongue, every nation, he says, worshiping at the throne of God.
And I think that is the beauty of being able to help share these testimonies in this space is, yes, these are fascinating accounts, and it's fun to learn about all these different things and tell these stories. But the one thing Randy and I always talk about that we hope people get is that all of this is on the table for you too. This Jesus that we're talking about, this Jesus that these people encountered, this God the Father who just adores you and He created you with all of everything that you have. Like, I hope that that's what people encounter in so many of these stories, because we can often get fascinated. Oh wow, what did Jesus look like in the throne room? And oh my gosh, and they saw their puppy in heaven and all these things. And it's easy. Like, people often fixate on details that for whatever reason struck a chord with them.
Right.
But my hope is, not unlike what you're trying to do and imagine the God of heaven, is that they actually encounter the God of heaven in these stories. That's really what this is all about.
And
Uh,
he's
Go ahead.
there. He's with you. He's there. It's like he said to Moses, you don't have to go up into heaven. You don't have to go down into the earth. He is as close, as your next breath.
Well, and as we wrap up, a couple of practical matters. John, in terms of where can people find you? I know you spent some time with a bunch of our friends filming for your curriculum tied to the book. You have we're recording this in late September. The book comes out November 7th. You've got a special pre-order promotion coming up. So, as we begin to wrap up, fill us in on those important details.
Yeah. So you can pre-order the book, and my Tyndale, my publisher, has given a free audio book with pre-order, so before November 7th. And you can find out about all of that at imaginethegodofheaven.com. So just book name, you search the book on Amazon. If you want, bookname.com is where you can get the free audio book. And also watch some of that curriculum. I think we have that offered out there. Or you can follow me at johnburkeonline.com. So either one.
Well, and we'll make it easy like we do with every episode. We'll have links in the description and the show notes to the websites we've mentioned, places where you can pre-order your copy of John's new book as well. It's time to bring this episode of the Sean Tabbitt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation with John Burke. Once again, our book today was Imagine the God of Heaven, Near-Death Experiences, God's Revelation, and the Love You've Always Wanted. And John, I want to say thank you so much for sharing with us today. It's been an honor and a pleasure to have you back in the show.
Thanks, Sean. Great to see you.